Good evening, everyone, and thank you for the attentive silence. My name is John Tates, and I'm the event coordinator here at McNally Robinson Booksellers. Before we begin, we would like to acknowledge that the land on which we gather is located here in Treaty 1 territory. That is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Anishinaabe, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. In addition, of course, McNally Robinson Booksellers itself rests on the land once occupied by the Métis community of Roostertown. We are here tonight, both in person and virtually, to celebrate the Winnipeg launch of Bury the Lead, a Quill and Packet Mystery, the first published collaboration of Kate Hilton and Elizabeth Renzetti. Many thanks to House of Anansi Press for publishing this volume and for supporting this event. A few quick housekeeping notes before we begin. Following the introduction of tonight's host, we will move along to a conversation that will be hosted by Temur Durrani. There will also be an opportunity for all of you to ask questions. If you're gathered here, please just put up your hand and I'll wander over to you, Sally, Jesse, Raphael style, with a handheld microphone. It's not because we don't trust you to project, it's just to ensure that those watching at home can actually hear your questions. And if you are one of those people joining us on YouTube, please feel free to write any questions you might have into the chat, and we will put them to tonight's authors as time permits. There will be some housekeeping notes about signing procedure at the end, so you can look forward to that adrenaline-soaked moment later on. The only thing I will instill in your brain for just one moment is we will ask you to remain in your seats for 1 second at the end of the event so we can safely transport our authors over to the signing table beside the cash desk. Now, we are thrilled to have Kate and Liz back here in the city. We are also thrilled to have Temur Durrani, who has also returned to Winnipeg, as our host for tonight. Temur is a national reporter for the Globe and Mail, focusing on Manitoba. He is also the host of Better For It, a Globe podcast about how failure shaped Canadian business leaders. Previously, he was a technology reporter for the Globe's Report on Business, based in Toronto. A globe-trotting news hound, Mr. Durrani has covered protests in Hong Kong, graffiti art in India and Pakistan, crashes in Alaska, crime in the GTA, federal politics in Ottawa, small business in the Maritimes, finance on the prairies, and even the Raptors' historic run to the NBA final. Before joining the Globe, he worked at BNN Bloomberg, where he reported investigative stories and business features for broadcast and digital audiences. Prior to that, Mr. Durrani was a staff reporter at the Winnipeg Free Press, the Toronto Star, iPolitics, and the New Brunswick Telegraph-Journal. He is now stationed here in Winnipeg. Here to introduce our guest this evening, please join me in giving a very warm welcome to Temur Durrani.
Thank you for that great introduction, John. I don't know how I'm supposed to follow with that, but I will try my best. First, we have here Kate Hilton. Kate is the best-selling author of 3 novels, The Hole in the Middle, Just Like Family, and Better Luck Next Time. When not writing, Kate works with psychotherapy and life coaching clients in the area of transformational change. No stranger to reinvention herself, Kate has had prior careers in law, university administration, publishing, and major gift fundraising. She lives in Toronto in a blended family, including a husband, 2 sons, a stepdaughter, and a rescue dog. And then we have Elizabeth Renzetti, who is a best-selling Canadian author and journalist. She has worked for the Globe and Mail as a reporter, editor, and columnist. In 2020, she won the Landsberg Award for her reporting on gender equality. She is the author of the essay collection Trude, a wry and closely observed look at the lives of women and girls, and the novel based on a true story, which is fantastic. Her book, What She Said, Conversations About Equality, will be published in 2024. She lives in Toronto with her family. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here, and please put a round of applause for our authors for being here today, too. We'll sit here, make my little way through. I was like worried about that. I was like, I'm gonna fee-fi-fo-fum my way through here. Okay. I bring my notepad with lots and lots of questions, okay? So let's, first I wanna introduce you all to how I'm gonna categorize these many questions. Because I was thinking about it, I was like, I feel like it's good to first lay out a bit of housekeeping rules for everybody how tonight might go, especially because I know you guys have some questions too for Liz and Kate. So we're gonna run it in 4 different categories. First, we're gonna go with talking about the book itself. We're also gonna talk about writing the book specifically, and I'm gonna try to not do any spoilers, because this one in particular is one of those you want to read yourself. It's just got so many great twists and turns. And then I also want to talk about some juicy details like future projects that both of you have coming up. And finally, audience questions. So while we talk and while we're sort of going through these many questions, I hope you guys take out the time to think about your question. If you want to maybe write it down just to remember it. And then we'll come back at the end and ask you guys questions, okay?
I love how organized you are.
Thank you, I appreciate that. Stick with that, because there might be some disorganization as I listen to you guys and go through these questions, because when I was reading this book, it inspired so many questions for me. And then even just honestly thinking about the two of you writing this book together has inspired so many questions for me, because I think that's such a unique process just to be able to do, right? So I guess we'll start there, writing the book itself. I think that's a good way to sort of set this up. I want to ask you first, I think this is the simplest question, and I'm sure one you've gotten a lot already. How did you two decide to co-write this novel?
Well, we were both authors, obviously. I was previously a journalist, worked at the Globe and Mail, Temur, and with also with Andre Picard, who interviewed us last night.
I love that.
Very exciting. And when you're a journalist, when you're a novelist too, or a writer of nonfiction, it's a really solitary process. It can be quite draining. It's just you and your sad computer screen, and you get no feedback whatsoever, except for the horrible voice in your head that says, "Why are you doing this?" And then during the pandemic, Kate and I have been friends for a long time, and we were talking one day about how much we were having trouble writing and reading during that horrible time, and also what was bringing us pleasure, and that was mysteries. We both love mysteries. We both grew up reading mysteries, and they were a great pleasure to us. And one of the things you'll hear from novelists, they say, write the book that you want to read. And so then what happened, Kate?
Well, then we were on a COVID date in the snowy little park in Toronto, and we were both kind of depressed. And I said, I've been thinking maybe, because I had another project I was working on, and so did Liz, but we were eventually getting to them. We were kind of sitting flat on our desks, and we were, with our covers over our heads, just wishing the pandemic would go away. And I said, I've been thinking I should write a mystery. And Liz said, I've been thinking that too. So I said, we should really be doing it together, because we had, in fact, proposed a nonfiction book about, for midlife ladies, a little guide how-to that no one wanted to publish. But we had enjoyed very much the process of putting that together. And we discovered in that process that we had a very similar sense of humor and way of looking at the world. And we thought our jokes were funny. So we thought, well, okay, fine. So they don't want to, Jen Gunter clearly has that area locked and loaded, but we should try to write something together. And so we said, why don't we do? It's not like there's anything else pressing, the world has stopped, so we might as well have a little time and play with this idea. So we did.
Yeah, we did, and it turned out to be a huge amount of fun, more fun than I've ever had writing anything. And I said before, and I'll say again, I don't know why more people don't write together, because it really, if you have the right partner, it's like a marriage, right? If you could find the right partner, the person who's simpatico with you and with your writing style, it is just a joy, and it does cut the work in half, which is very nice. And also, you're not so lonely. It's not just you and the the angry screen staring at. They really make it sound like I love writing. With this terrible, evil eye of your computer staring at you. You have somebody to bounce everything off of, and it's delightful.
Well, the worst part of being a writer is writing, right? Like, it's just like the least favorite part. You have all these ideas, all these things, and reporting to you, all the reporting is so fun, and then sitting down on a computer and writing is the worst part. So I get where that comes from. Having somebody to do that with is.
Carl Wilson, who is a friend of mine, who used to work at the Globe before, I think before you came.
Yeah.
And he's written.
It still lingers around.
Yes, and he wrote a wonderful book about Celine Dion. And he once said something to me that really stuck in my head, which is that most other art forms are collaborative. If you're making a movie, it's collaborative. If you're making a theater production or dance or music in a symphony or in a band, it pretty much is always collaborative. And writing is the one that's solitary.
Mm.
And it's, and it can really kind of, it can drag you down, because you also, it takes years to write a book, so you only have your faith in yourself to keep you going that whole time. So this is why, another reason why collaboration is great.
You know, we'll stick with writing questions for a bit, just because the craft stuff, we never get to do that. So it's fun to be able to do that in some ways. And I think it's one of those things where I used to think it was the boring stuff, right? But that's where sometimes people want to know the craft of it, because we never talk about it in that way. I want to ask you both, at the Globe we have this like almost parlance where we say this, right? When reporters are put together on a story or something, and or you just naturally, your beats align on something and you're working on the same story, we say who gets to hold the pen, right? And basically that means, you know, one person out of maybe a team of 2, 3, 4, sometimes even 5 people, or even more, who is the one person who gets to sort of say, I will write down the reporting and all the things that we're doing and getting done together, while everything can sort of be distributed equally in some ways and in a nice symbiotic way, so that it doesn't take away from the actual writing itself either. There's a common voice, don't worry about it. And in this story, I didn't, you know, feel like, and I think this is the thing, it's interesting with novels where I don't know how that approach is for you two. I've heard you two alternated in chapters, right? So tell me how that was like that idea.
Both held the pen.
Yeah.
Yeah, we both held the pen. So process-wise, I think if you're gonna, I write this way anyway, with every book I do, not everyone does, but certainly if you're collaborating, you really have to have a plan. Like a very, you know, the world of writers has planners and pantsers, right? I'm a plotter. You might be more of a pantser by nature, but when you work together, you both have to be plotters and planners, because you have to know where everything's going. So for us, we were collaboratively come up first with a synopsis, which is like, what are the big themes in the book? Who are the characters? Like, what are the ideas that we really want to play with here? And we spend a lot of time, and that's just like the blue sky phase, right? And then once we've nailed that down, then we get really serious about an outline that probably takes a couple of months to produce the outline. It's like 20 single-spaced pages. It's like every single, few paragraphs for every single chapter. So we know exactly what's going to happen with all the characters. That's not to say things don't move around a little bit in the writing, because as you know, you sit down to write something, it doesn't always go exactly the way you planned it to go, but mostly we know the arc of all the characters and the A plot, B plot, C plot, and so on. And then once we have that, we do kind of table tennis it, right? It's like, you do chapter 1 and I'll do chapter 2. And it's fun. I keep saying this, but it's true. It's like this, for me, the most unexpected part of this process is it allows you to be both a writer and a reader on the project, right? Because my Liz will write to me and say, okay, my chapter is in the book. We keep a Google Doc, right? Yeah. Liz writes her chapters in Word and dumps them in. I actually just mess around in the doc itself, because I started doing that, and then I was like, I have to let go of my shame about this. If Liz sees the messy,
it's like being in a dressing room, right? Like the swimming pool. It's like, I'm just gonna let everything out.
Yeah. At some point, you kind of have to just embrace it, right?
Exactly. So I just work in the doc, and because I'm also afraid of losing things, so this is all in one place. And and so then, but she'll send me a text and say my chapter's in, and I'll open it up, and I get this thrill every time. It's like, Liz's chapter's here. It's really fun. Yeah.
Would you recommend, you already said you would recommend it, but like, what are parts that you didn't envision you had to learn through this too, right? Like, maybe there were some difficult parts too with working with somebody, because it is writing a novel is such a specific thing, right? It's and we'll get to this fiction versus nonfiction thing for both of you too, right? Like, it's a very different thing in many ways, but specifically here with the co-writing aspect.
You do a little bit have to leave your ego at the door, because you recognize that and again, that's the thing about being in a collaborative art project as opposed to a single one. When it's just your book, it's sort of everything is on you, and it's your vision. And this is about the product that we're making, the creation that we're making. So you kind of have to understand that each individual ego is subsumed to make the whole. And that, you know, that can, I thought it was gonna be, I'm honest, I thought it was gonna be harder than it actually is. It actually did not turn out to be, so far, it hasn't turned out to be that hard at all. And we do have a rule that we're gonna be, right from the beginning, we had just had a couple rules. We'd always be kind and generous, but honest with each other, always. If something wasn't working, we would get rid of it or revise it or whatever. But also, if there was something we really did particularly love and the other person was like, if you really wanted to, you could kind of stamp C that and say, no, we're gonna keep that in. Unless it was, you know, something truly terrible or it took the plot in the wrong direction, but if it was just a sentence or something like that. Yeah, so in that way, it's been a just sort of, you know, a Zen exercise in overcoming ego. It's been very useful. Yeah.
At this point, we've read so many whodunits too, right?
Yeah.
Like there's been a lot of great mystery novels that I'm sure you guys have read growing up, and many of us have, right? It's hard. Sorry. I got a little dry thing.
Do you have water there?
I don't know if I do.
Oh,
I think I might. There we go. Sorry about that. We'll get to questions right at the end, so just hold on to that. Yeah, we'll come to you with a question. Yeah.
No.
No, you wanna ask?
You wanna
right
ask
now?
a question now?
Yeah.
I'm okay.
Yeah, we can do that. Like, yeah,
Go for
let's
it.
do it. Yeah.
You avoid idea. So this is good you like to let me ask?
Yeah, go ahead.
You need speaker?
We're gonna get you a mic.
We're getting all freaky here.
Yeah, yeah,
Going
yeah.
off piece.
Yeah.
Thank you, I remember you. Firstly, I would like to say thank you very much to this bookstore. And I did after the event that before, and I feel very, very lucky to after today. Okay, because rarely I stop here, so I stop at the writing. So I firstly just say congratulations to me. Okay.
Okay.
Congrats to you.
Yeah, to me. Okay.
Okay.
And sure that for all of you. Okay. And my question is, when I feel like right from the beginning, before you develop to try your book, you connect with a lady from Cloth and Mail. For when you finish, you need the help from Cloth and Mail to introduce your book to the people, right? So this is very good for you have connection like that before you start to write. And my question is, the Globe and Mail newspaper also in Winnipeg, but in local newspaper we have Winnipeg Free Press. And I see in Winnipeg Free Press don't have any corner connect with any writer to publish like you with the Globe and Mail. Okay, so this is my idea. I would like to see any local writer.
Oh, you would like to see
Yeah,
more local
local-
Winnipeg writers?
Right.
For art
Okay.
stories, is that like for books?
Connect with Winnipeg Free Press.
Yeah.
Well, we actually, Ben Sigurdsson from the Free Press actually
Yes.
wrote, he connected with it too. Yeah, so the Free Press actually,
No, I just say for local, people from Toronto.
Yes, we are from Toronto.
Right, you people from, I
Yes.
just say for local people.
right,
Because Winnipeg Free Press don't have any section to give a helping hand for writers.
Oh, you mean in the newspaper itself?
Right.
Yeah.
You'd like to see more support for local writers in the paper.
You connect with the Globe and Mail.
Mm.
Okay, so this is a very good idea to give helping hand for a writer, local writer, connect with the newspaper, local news.
I appreciate that, thank you,
Take
thank
that
you,
on
yeah.
board. There you go.
Yeah,
Take
you
that
know, we
for
will
this
take that
one.
on board, thank you.
Okay.
And sorry, I say about Winnipeg local. I just say good luck to you and.
Thank you.
Thank
That's
you.
so
I
kind.
appreciate
Thank
that.
you very much.
Thank you.
Connection and
Yeah.
good idea.
Thank you.
Thank
That's
you.
very nice.
Thank you.
Appreciate that.
That is sweet. I wanna come back to the writing of the book itself again. And one of the things I wanna sort of ask you both about is, again, let's do about the whodunit of it all, right?
Yeah.
And mystery novels, which, as I said before, we've read many of them, right? At this point, there's been a lot, but this one feels very fresh. And there's a very
Aw,
real sort of
thank you.
sense of like, you know, that there's a lot of twists and turns that can sometimes almost feel like the same as what you've read before, and yet they don't. How did you come to that? Was that something you guys thought about as you were writing? Because again, we've read these books, right? We all grew up loving mystery books in some ways, right? So how do you think about that with the craft of it? Or do you not? Do you try to, you know, where did you come with that?
You think about it all the
Definitely.
time, but you never know if you've achieved it until someone like you
Yeah.
tells you you're right. I don't know, do you wanna take a run at that?
Yeah, that's such an interesting question, and thank you for asking. I will say that, like, every time I'm driving down, my husband slightly crazy because we'll be like going into an elevator and I'll be like, okay, so somebody could die in an elevator if the thing snaps. And just last night we were with Leslie Hurtig from the Vancouver Writers Festival. She was telling us about this festival that's on an island. And I was like, that's a good setting for a murder.
Yeah.
I only think in terms of only murders in my head is and then Kate and I were talking about this last night. A mystery novel, much more than any other novel, maybe romance in terms of genre, is like an engine. It has certain parts that have to work, that have to fit together, and everything has to move smoothly for the mystery to work. And you need all of those components, and you need twists. So we actually do look at it like kind of like a braided chain, A, B, and C plots. And then we think about where the twists will come. And it's interesting, in an early draft of Mary the Lead, Kate's husband Sasha read a draft, and I think he figured out, and then we had to go back and like kind of reverse engineer, take some clues out, put other clues in. So that's really interesting, because I agree with you. I feel like
we've read it all. Like
how can
it's
there
hard,
still be
right?
mysteries?
Yeah.
'Cause, like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you're right, like there's a lot of genre limitations too that you will come into with it too, right? Like, so there's this almost idea of if you don't hit those genre notes, then you're gonna get a set of readers who are gonna be like, no, this is not how it's supposed to be, right?
Super unhappy with you.
Yeah, and yet this does that. You push those buttons in some ways with Bury the Lead, and you know, then you find a way that it is new, and you read it, and these characters feel fresh and relatable in a real way. Which brings me to the book. I do want to talk about specifically, so I want to start with the start of the book. I think that's one thing I really want to, this is my second category of the questions of the book itself, because I really think when I started reading the book, I thought about the beginning again and where you guys started from with, and I'm going to try not to bring up any spoilers, but I'm going to say it starts off with Eliot Fraser, one of our characters, who we learn very quickly, again, this isn't part of a spoiler, but he dies in the plot, right? That is the beginning.
There
dies
it is,
early,
it's in the
yeah.
cover
It
copy.
dies instantly, so I'm very sorry, this is not a spoiler, but that's kind of what sets off the tone for that, right? But in some ways, also something else to me felt like you started the tone of the book, which was you talk about, he talks about the treasure in his pants with our main character.
Yeah.
And for both of you, especially for Liz, knowing your work in the past, and you know, Kate as well, I don't know, I didn't think that to be the beginning, so it almost caught me off guard. I was like, oh, I didn't think this was a book that I would start off with talking about a man's treasure in his pants in the beginning. But it kind of told us a bit of what this character was off the bat, right? So why was that important to you? Why was it important to do it in the way that it did, to start off that way?
Yeah, well, it's important. Kat is a funny character, and by that I mean she is funny. She's dry, she's sardonic, she's got a really kind of slightly sarcastic view of the world, dry sense of humor, which Kate and I share definitely. And you have to let the reader know, I think, right from the beginning, what the character sees, what they hear, what choices they make, tell you about the character. And they also tell you what kind of journey you're going to be on. Like, is this going to be a slightly funnier mystery, which this one is? Is it going to be really dark and gritty? Is it going to be a noir? And so you know right from the beginning, because and it's a first person mystery, and Kat is a journalist, and she's interviewing Eliot. So you kind of get all of that sense right off, all those clues right off the bat, I think, with her.
And you get right off the bat that she maybe doesn't think very highly of someone who's looking down her shirt in an interview. Like there's you know, there's definitely kind of a perspective.
Which has happened to me, I just want to say.
Yeah. And that's the thing, like, it plays with so many of these things that we have seen, and I think that that's probably what a lot of fiction writers like about fiction, right? The idea that you can almost put a mirror up for the world to show that this is what it looks like, but we're just in the world of fiction. It kind of allows you to be able to play with that a lot, right? Tell me about Kat herself. You kind of mentioned it, and people are now getting to know Kat, which they will get to know even more as we talk about her. But she has so many layers. She is such a, it's not like a, you know, cookie cutter journalist either, right? Like what we see, and we've seen these terrible tropes in movies. As a journalist myself, I think the hardest part sometimes about watching journalists in movies and books, reading them in books is so hard because they're never written in the right way. And Kat doesn't feel that way. She feels like a real person. Why was that important to, I guess I'll talk about, why was it important to even make her a journalist? Was this something you guys talked about, that who is the person that drives this whole narrative, right?
So making her a journalist was extremely important, and I might get Liz to answer that piece after. But one thing about that is that a journalist, you know, has what Liz calls the skeleton key to the world, right? So with an amateur detective, you have to find a reason why they can get into places and ask people questions, right? In a normal police procedural, they're flashing their badge, ma'am, and can I come in and tell you and ask you and so on and get a warrant, and it's a different kind of access, right? When you're dealing with people who have a legitimate reason for asking these questions. With an amateur detective, you have to find a reason for them, whether it's Miss Marple and they're just a super nosy neighbor, and it's like, oh no, it's her again over the fence, or whatever, like the village vet. You know, what's their reason for sneaking around and learning things? So being a journalist gives you, as you both know, a good reason to ask questions and be nosy and be places where, you know, behind the scenes where you might not otherwise, regular people don't get to go. So, and I think we both wanted, Liz in particular, but I also am not a journalist myself, but a huge lover and believer in good journalism. And we wanted to say something about how much we value that business. But the other piece, and Liz, I'm sure will have something to add to that, but the other piece about Kat is she's a middle-aged lady, right?
Yeah,
so she's, you know, she's our age. We originally tried to write her a bit younger and it just wasn't working for us.
She was a millennial at first.
Yeah.
And
I know, it was
Just-
like, exactly,
it's kind of
it's hard, right? Yeah.
Right. Yeah, and we've sort of realized, like, we don't actually know very much about this age group. We don't share their concerns, right? Like, we're worried about our pelvic floors and whether we can pay off our mortgage before we die, and, you know, things like that.
I also can't imagine Kat being a millennial. I think that's the thing, right?
Neither could we.
Yeah,
That's a problem.
By the end, I think, like, also the plot, it becomes central to the plot who Kat is, and you give her this almost layered, and this is the thing, sometimes with journalists in particular, when we do start writing about them, they become these spotless creatures, you know, and they're like these amazing people with amazing values, and Kat can be that, but she's not always that. She's a bit of a checkered past too, right? Like, she has her own history.
she has made mistakes in the past.
And it becomes part of the narrative, right? Like, why was that important? Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I think you don't want to write, nobody wants to write about, and I don't think anybody wants to read about a spotless protagonist. I think that there's nothing more boring than the so-called, you know, the Mary Sue character who always makes the right decisions and sort of is, you know, impregnable in all kinds of ways. It's just so dull. And, you know, about 10 years ago, there was really a lot of talk about, especially having unlikable female characters in books, and a lot of publishers. My first novel got rejected all over the place because publishers were just like, oh, she's so unlikable. Why would anybody want to read about her? It's so interesting. And now, you know, there was a bit of a revolution, you know, Gillian Flynn wrote a whole bunch of books, and other writers too, about women who are, you know, who are complete, who are flawed, who have many facets. And I like to think that Kat does too. She's made mistakes in her life, but she's also at heart, I think, a really good person who is in a bad place. She's, you know, lost her job because of something she did, and she doesn't have a very good relationship with her child, and she's going through a bad divorce. And all of those things are very rich things to write about. There's a saying in novels, novelists say, happiness writes white, which means like it's very hard to write you know, color into somebody who's just you wanna have a happy life, but you don't wanna write about necessarily people who have happy lives, cause there's
Right.
nothing to grab onto.
Yeah, I have to ask also about because for me, I think geography and location, even more so as I get more and more into my journalism career, I think it becomes even more important for me. Like, I think it's so important to bring your audience into the place that you're talking about, because like you guys said, we get access to things that sometimes people might not. So it's so important to bring everybody back into where the person to what was talking to us, how they were talking. Those things are even more, especially with ChatGPT, I think it's even more important to bring that color that only humans can sometimes get, right?
Yes, totally.
I think with this particular novel, geography is a very real, almost character, right? Like it's like part of where the narrative takes us, why it is the way people are. And I have to ask, there are elements of it that are fictional and elements that are very obviously also not fictional, right? Why was it important to keep it in Ontario and specifically, maybe more broadly, I guess, in Canada still, regardless of the fact that the town itself is Port Ellis, a fictional town?
Fictional.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think with any cozy or cozy adjacent mystery, you know, the setting is a character, right? And you get it, the particularity of it really matters. And then it also has to have a sort of a universality, right? And the thing about Port Ellis is, so why does it matter that it's Canadian? Well, it wouldn't have to be, but in our case, we were really thinking about a very specific kind of Ontario summer town, right? And I grew up with a family place in Muskoka, which is, you know, either a 2 or 6 hour drive from Toronto, depending on traffic.
It's kind of like the Kenora
Oh,
of that part.
okay,
Yeah, very similar.
But it also represents all of these kind of holiday towns, right, that are outside of urban centers where, you know, city folks like to retreat to and spend their money in either ski season or the summer season or whatever the fashionable season is. And meanwhile, these communities, you know, thrive year round, but maybe wouldn't thrive without that money coming in from the outside in the tourist season. So it becomes a very complicated relationship that these towns have with their sort of economic drivers who kind of come in, and those people may think of themselves sort of as benefactors, and the people in the town think of them as kind of like nosy outsiders to come in and like bring their values and their kind of opinions.
And their Olga stoves and their, basil flavored gelato.
Right. And so there's really interesting tension in those places, right? About how does the land get used and what are the politics of these places and who really belongs in these places. And I always found that interesting about the cottage towns that I grew up around. But you know, so the mysteries all need all kinds of tension, right? So the setting generates its own kind of tension just because it is sort of battling those forces of gentrification. And because Kat is both an outsider and an insider, right? She's new there, she has a family history there, but is she gonna stay? Does she wanna stay? Does she really feel like she's part of the town? And that's part of the tension in her character too.
Yeah. And I think there's a very real sort of sense of, I almost wrote this down because I thought like, what are so many themes you guys touch on because of this, right? Like there's, the decline of journalism, which we're talking about, you know, life as a woman in the industry, the challenges of motherhood, class tensions, race, the Me Too era, and so many of these sensitive topics, but serious topics, right? And yet it's a fun narrative. It comes off that way. And so I wonder, was this something you thought about too, that it needs to be not preachy either, and it needs to be part of, you know, that we want it to still feel like the real world where we're trying to reflect?
Absolutely. That was, I don't think we could have written in any other way. I don't think you and I, like, we couldn't write like Stephen King, you know, we could not have clowns murdering people. I wish I could, but it's not in me. It is only in me to write the way that I can write. And fortunately, Kate's voice is very similar to mine. And I do feel like there's, like I like to say, you know, humor and mystery go together like peanut butter and chocolate. I like, you know, I grew up reading like Carl Hyacin and things like that, and those wonderful books that were about like corruption in Florida, which were so funny, but also so dark because they said something so profound about human nature, which is at its heart, if you ask me, kind of absurd, most of what we do, most of our striving is kind of absurd, when you think about it in the long run, because we'll all be under the ground. But if you can write about a serious topic, and I did this as a journalist too, as a columnist, if you can write about a serious topic in a way that engages people, you keep them till the end of the column or the story or whatever. And we all know how hard it is to keep, like we have all these, you used to get all these metrics about how much people read of your story, and it'd be like, they read 72 words and then they turn the page.
It's why news writers front load everything at the top, right? Because they want to make sure you just get it before you walk away, right?
Well, but this is also really interesting because Laura Lippman, another great journalist turned mystery writer, whose mysteries are also quite funny in places. She said something, and it had never occurred to me before, because lots of journalists become mystery or thriller writers. And she said, so as a journalist, especially if you're just doing straight news, you're trained in this idea of the inverted pyramid, which means all of the information has to go at the very top of the story, lest you lose readers and less, hence bury the lead. And she said, and it never occurred to me before, that a mystery is exactly the opposite.
Yeah.
You have to bury the lead. You have to save the very most important information for the very end of the book. And as a journalist, it's kind of hard to do that. You're like, your instincts are all like, oh, everybody needs to know this, but no, they don't. You've got to hold it back as well. So that's an interesting writing tension.
Because you want to give it away at the top. I mean, that's something you're so used to, which is kind of, again, brings me to this. How is fiction something you're still doing, Liz? Because I don't know. I think it would be
so
very
much more fun than journalism. I'm writing this nonfiction book that's coming out in October. And I love it. It's going to be, I hope it'll be great. But
I'm sure it will be.
Fiction is fun.
Yeah.
Because I don't have to wake up. I don't know. Do you wake up at 3 a.m. going, oh my God, did I misquote so-and-so? Did I get that person's name wrong?
Yes,
Did I
very much
misinterpret what they were telling me, and then I put it in the paper?
Even the periods and the commas haunt me sometimes. Yeah. And they'll haunt me like an hour after too. I'm like, oh, did that not go through? Yeah. It's the way it is. Yeah.
And fiction's liberating.
Yeah, it can, and I think that this novel feels that way too, in a very real way. It feels like, a lot of people had pandemic projects, and this was yours, but in a lot of ways, like, I think this project really is able to tell you, you kind of want to have fun with something too. So it's a nice read in that way. And yet there are serious topics there, right? Like, there's so many that you allow in that sort of vein of, this is Kat Conway, she's dealing with this. Like, these are real things that every woman is dealing with, especially in the journalism industry in particular, right? And I want to talk about those moral ambiguities in particular that you guys mentioned, because as a journalist, we see this a lot, right? Like, and we think about it. I mean, I think about it a lot about, why do people owe their story to me all the time, right? And how you get away with that sometimes. Like, you ask a question and then you just shut up and they tell you all sorts of things, and you almost don't know whether people should be telling you the things they're telling you all the time. It's like that, right? And Kat deals with these a lot through the book. And I think there's a universality of that too, in some ways, that isn't just about journalists, and yet it's so specific here. Why were these tensions important to the plot itself, I guess, is where I'm headed with this question. Like, what was it that made this into the journalism aspect that you guys thought was important to bring into Kat specifically?
Well, I think also those choices illustrate her as a character, right? And I compare her to, again, Gillian Flynn wrote a really good but very disturbing book called Sharp Objects, with a very damaged protagonist who's a journalist and who is very, very ambivalent about her choices as a journalist. Kat is also a little bit ambivalent, but less so. And in Gillian Flynn's book, she kind of talks herself at one point into the house of a grieving mother. And like the whole time she's like, oh, why am I doing this? But also I have to do this because my editor expects this story. And she thinks to herself that the editor has said to her that journalists are like vampires. You have to invite them in before they can come into your house, but then they'll never leave. And I thought, oh, that's so true. And Kat does. She struggles with this all the time. And I used to struggle with, like, if I was talking to somebody who was a survivor of something and they would say something and I think, oh, I don't know if that should actually go in the paper or not. more often than not, and as I actually grew in my career, I erred on the side of not putting things, I erred on the side of protecting people, and she, I think, is kind of at that stage of her career too,
Yeah.
where she's more of where her career is less important to her than being a good human being is.
It's that tension that's so central to the story. I have so many other questions too, but I don't wanna give away about the plot of the thing. So I guess I'll leave many of those up to everybody else as they think about and read the book. We'll move on to future projects, because I think that's important before we let the audience ask questions. What's next? I hear that, the two of you are already working on part of the series with Quill Packet. So tell me about that.
We are. So we sold 2 books at the outset to Husband Nancy. So thank you, Husband Nancy. So the second book is called Widows and Orphans, because it also has a journalism pun. We'll keep doing journalism puns for as long as we can think of them, and you can still want to read the books. And I don't want to give too much away about that, but all of them will be set in Port Ellis. All of them will center around the Quill Packet newspaper family. But this one is going to be set at a wellness conference.
Ooh, okay.
Yeah.
I'm excited about that.
But also your other book.
Oh, my other book, yeah. So we both have solo projects too. And one of the really great things, there are so many great things about co-writing, actually, I highly recommend it, but it's also that it leaves time for you to do solo projects, right? So, so I'm gonna have 2 books coming out in 2025, a second book with Liz, and then a solo project that I've been working on for a ridiculously long time. That's a dual timeline historical mystery set on an archaeological site around 1900 in Egypt.
And it's called.
Has
the title changing?
The title is changing.
Okay.
Yes, and I don't know what the title is now. So we're banding it around, and there's some like old British.
I'm just learning this now.
I love that. Okay.
It's like this.
So this is a McNally exclusive. The title has changed.
The title has changed.
I feel like publishing is so, everybody's a reader in this room. I'm a reader, Kate's a reader, you're all readers. But if you're not sort of in the industry, I feel like the mechanics of publishing are so obscure. Also of journalism too, are very obscure to people. So you don't know, for example, that your editor will often say, no, that title doesn't work, and let's come up with a better title.
How many people know that headlines are not written by the reporters themselves? It's just something you tell people, they're like, what, they're not? And it's like, no, that's not my job. I'm not that great at writing headlines. I wish I was. It makes people better for that. That's just the way it is. It's the same for.
Sometimes you probably think the headline is kind of stupid.
I almost all the time. And then thankfully you have the nice editors who will help you switch it up a little bit later. Yeah. I do have to ask also about your solo project, Liz.
Yeah.
You have a non-fiction solo project.
I have a non-fiction.
Later this year.
Yes, in October, coming out in October. With McClelland and Stewart, storied Canadian publishing house, so that's wonderful. It's called What She Said, Conversations About Equality, and it's about gender equality. A lot of the things, you read my columns that I wrote about over years, and it's just sort of about what is happening this moment in time, a lot of which is quite bad, if you ask me. But it's also my own story woven in there and my reporting over the years. So that's coming up. And then the next Quill Packet, hopefully it'll be a series. And I'm also working on another novel too, which, some might see the light of day.
Okay.
Sometime.
I love that. Okay. Well, those are the questions I have for you guys today, but if there are any audience questions, I would love to pass around. Do you guys have any questions right now? Yeah? Well, we have one over there. Yeah. And then we'll come over there. We'll pass around the mic.
Hi, so I'm just wondering, was this the original title or did it change?
Good question.
This was the original title.
This was the original title.
Yeah.
And it works, and it's great because it works on a lot of levels because you will know, other journalists have said to me, it should be lead, L-E-D-E, which is how we would spell it, but he's the lead in the play. But also it works on Bury the Lead, which is like sort of a more noirish kind of take on if you shoot somebody, bury the lead. Nobody gets shot.
Nobody gets shot.
No.
Nobody gets shot. No.
Yeah, so it came to us and it was perfect. And
Lots of puns with that one, yeah. But did people know that we spell it with an L-E-D-E in newspaper jargon? Okay, yes, it's the thing. It's a good
I don't
thing
even know why that is.
Yeah, I think it's a good thing you spelled it with an L-E-A-D, just because most people wouldn't even know what L-D-E means. It's a good one.
But a number of gentlemen have written to us to tell us that we spelled it.
Oh, I'm sure the journalists will also complain. This is the thing, journalists will come, like, they will complain, you know, it's just the way it is. Any other questions? Let's pass around maybe perhaps, yeah. Oh, good, yeah, lots of questions. No?
How much fun was it setting in small regional Canadian theatre?
Oh my God, so much fun. Beyond fun. Like both of us are big theater buffs. Liz was an arts theater reporter for a long time. And I'm a lifelong theater fan. I mean, it was fun for me because Liz has all this scuttlebutt because she actually, you know, got to use her journalism skeleton key to go backstage a lot and interview a lot of these old lions of the stage and screen. So we got to harvest some of those fun stories and insights from that. But yeah, I mean, it's a wonderful kind of a locked room to play with, right? Because there's so many characters writ large and so many petty jealousies and betrayals and, you know, people are such extroverts in some ways, but so desperately insecure in other ways. And it has big characters in it. So you know, when you're writing a mystery, you need to kind of find a locked room where you've got all your suspects kind of clustered, and doing that in a theater was fun. But I also, for me, like there are these magical Ontario experiences in the summer that are attached to Stratford and Shaw, but also a lot of regional summer stock theater that's like a very lively part of small town life. And so, yeah, it was just, it's been a part of my life from childhood is to participate in these kind of really fun summer stock theater productions. So I was really happy to have that, be able to build that world out.
I just love actors. The character, the protagonist in my first book is also an actress. And I just love actors because they're kind of kooky, to put it politely. When I lived in London, there was a famous actor who lived on our street, and he would just like, he would sing to himself in the grocery store, and he would like sort of dance along the street, calling to his children, you know, like he was in a production of Finian's Rainbow the whole time. It was so funny. And he was just like magical to watch. And they're so interesting because they're so, as Kate says, they're so kind of, they're like id and super ego at the same time. They're so outward and you know, there's also inward too, but they're absolutely delightful to write about. I was joking with my daughter the other day that if I hadn't been a writer, I would have been like a wig maker or something, or a set maker at Stratford. I have costume designers, like anything. I just love the world of the theater so much, theater memoirs and everything about the theater.
Well, they're so rich in the same way that journalists are, and that's like a setting, right? In so many ways that you could pull from, and it kind of makes it so juicy too. Like it makes it fun. You get to know all these people in there,
and it's tribal, like journalism,
very much
right?
so.
Like
they're given to feuding and fighting, and
because you're all passionate in some way too, but you're also having your own things going on, so you bring it to you metaphorically, almost on the stage. Well, really on the stage in many ways. Yeah. Any other questions in the audience? Yeah. We'll move the mic to you. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm kind of curious about this co-writing, and if you're writing one and somebody else, and the next is written by another person, how difficult it is to keep the voice the same.
That's a really, really good question. And in fact, we were on Bianca Murray, the podcast, The Shit No One Tells You About Writing, which is great. If anybody is a writer or wants to be a writer, it's wonderful to read. Bianca's very smart. And she asked us this question, and it was really a wise question, which was what you're saying. She said, how do you know that you're seeing the character through the same eyes? And it was like, well, we can't, unfortunately, but we discovered pretty early that our voices did mesh, and also that in the editing process, it becomes much more seamless. So Kate wrote a chapter, I'll be thrilled with it. I might put in a couple of notes, and in the second draft, I will, you know, smooth out some bits. She'll take my chapter, she'll put in some questions, smooth out some bits, so that Kat's voice is more seamless. And in the second draft, I honestly didn't know sometimes if I had written a chapter or
I
if
love
Kate had
that.
written it.
And of course, it's the first thing that people we know who got early copies of the book did. Like, I read it to see who had written what, and if I could tell. We were really happy when people told us they couldn't tell. It kind of drove them crazy. And in fact, when we were at Calgary Word Fest, they were like randomly picking sentences out of the book. Who wrote this sentence? Who wrote that one? We didn't know. And I said, actually, even at the level of a sentence, like sometimes one of the sentences I was like, I think I wrote part of that sentence, but I don't think I wrote all of it, because I think like something.
Well, you can't tell, you really can't tell.
You can't tell, and but it drives out of the character, right? So like if you read one of my books and one of Liz's books, you could tell the
Very
difference in our
different voices,
voices.
yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. But because you're writing in a first person, it was a smart decision to write it in the first person, actually. Because you're writing it in the first person, you both have to get alongside the character and speak in her voice, right? And similarly as that, and see it through her eyes, and similarly with the other characters, you're developing a sense of like, what would that character do and say? What is accurate for them? What feels authentic for them? And so really when we're tagging stuff for each other, it's not that like, I don't like what you wrote, it's that I don't think the character would say that.
Yeah.
Do you really think the character would say that? It's more like that, right? That
They'd
doesn't
move
feel-
this way,
Yeah.
or they would make this decision instead. And that's all super useful, because like to go back to the evil blank page of the computer, you don't know often if you're making the right choice until you've rewritten something 20 times. So it's almost like you have a rewriter looking over, like an editor looking over your shoulder, and that's hugely helpful.
Like, I think, we said at the beginning, we promised we'd be generous to each other, and I also like treat couples in therapy, right? So I'm quite sensitive to these not getting along, and we do get along extremely harmoniously, but it's.
Which probably made it easier, right? I
Oh,
imagine co-writing is not always
Do
this
not co-write with
No,
someone that
we
you
know,
don't
yeah.
love and respect.
It sometimes could go badly for people.
It can go badly. But, we really felt like we understood that we were working together in service of the book and in service of the characters. And it wasn't about like being showy with like, I want to impress people with this particular sentence or paragraph, because ideally no one knows which one of us wrote it, right? So it really is about creating something together that at the end you can't tell who did what. So you really, it's required of you to take your ego out of it. Like no one's gonna say like, what a brilliant sentence you wrote.
Yeah.
Because
If they don't know that you wrote it.
you don't want them to know, right? That it was one or the other.
And in some ways, I think, like you said, like I think it kind of also makes sense for Kat to be something that isn't the voice of the two of you, in a way that you can kind of blend both of your voices through her lens, right? So it almost feels that way. Your experiences are being blended to kind of, in a way, fictionalize this version of what Kat is.
Yeah, her life experiences, like we both have teenage children, but, and I've been a journalist and you've been divorced, so we bring in all of these different, and you've lived a cottage experience.
I've lived a cottage.
You've
life.
lived a cottage life. So we each bring like our little strengths to the book.
Yeah. Any other questions here? I think we're almost at the end of time.
Look at all, I love it.
Lots of questions,
We are, absolutely. So we can squeeze in 2 more questions.
Okay.
We haven't asked yet. And then after that, we'll turn things over to you for closing comments. Then I'll let everyone know how they can get books signed.
Okay, perfect.
So my question was kind of already answered, but I'm still curious. I guess with the process of the writing, was it kind of like a chronological order? Because I know some people, they kind of they'll do like the end of the book, or they'll start in the beginning. So I was wondering if it was like chronological.
Also an excellent question. That's a really good, nobody's asked that question before. I used to be the publishing reporter at the Globe a long time ago, and I interviewed a gazillion novelists, and I was always amazed at how many of them said that they couldn't begin the novel until they'd written the last chapter. I've never done that myself, but so many said that. And so the answer to your question is, we write chronologically. We go like chapter 1, chapter 2, because I think otherwise we would just get lost in the writing. But so we have to. But then when we go back, we
Yeah.
mess around all over.
When I write my own stuff, I write mostly chronologically. I do not edit chronologically, like I'm all over the map, and sometimes I'm not necessarily writing chronologically if there's some part of the book that I feel like I have to nail down first to see if other things will work, because I always have my outline, right, so I can drop in. This was, like, there was no question with this. It had to march along bit by bit, steadily, chronologically, because especially with two of us working on it, there are small shifts that happen as we go where we depart from the outline, where we thought that would work, but when we get there, we're like, actually, no, we need to bring in something that we put in chapter 16 into chapter 9, because it has to happen here. It doesn't make sense if it doesn't happen earlier up. And then that changes everything. So, you do have to march along and, stay on track. It wouldn't work otherwise. I think probably with mysteries, mostly you have to do that, just because you have so many arcs going that you're trying to keep track
And the
of.
clues too that you've
And the
inserted when the
clues,
clue
yeah.
comes in,
Yeah.
And sorry, did
He has a
you-
follow-up.
follow-up. Did you guys pick which chapter you wanted to do, or was it sort of like one after the other, you kind of like collaboratively kind of went at it?
It's interesting you say that, because mostly we just like one after the other, but like in this book, I'm not gonna say what happens.
Yeah.
In the next book, there was that one chapter, I was like, I wanna write this one, because I had an idea that I had, and I wanted to write that, and Kate was like, yeah, go right ahead. And if she says, I wanna write this chapter, I'd be like,
Yeah.
yes.
So I think in both books, there have been like one or two where I was like, it hasn't always been 1, 2, 3, 4. It's been, like I actually want to do this one. Do you mind doing these 2 in a row? And I'll do it, but not that often. Mostly we just are quite democratic. Yeah.
And one last question we have, and you will have the last question.
We'll come to you, you'll ask. We'll move them back, and I promise we'll move them back. We'll come after you. I'm so sorry, we're almost out of time today, but you can ask more questions as you get the book signed, I promise.
Get the book signed and we'll
There we go,
answer.
yeah.
Thanks very much for your presentation. It's great, and I love the title, the great pun. The question I have for you is, working collaboratively is a different skill set from working as an individual. What are you going to take away from this experience that's going to affect your writing as a solo project in the future?
Good question.
That's a real, you guys are asking good questions.
Very good questions.
What will I take away from, I think, I was gonna say, be flippant and say, be less lazy, but it's kind of true, like, it has taught me that you one foot in front of the other, one word after the other is how you make a book. Carly Fortune, like, people always said to her, how did you write like 4 books in 4 years? And she said she figured out how long a draft of a book was, which is maybe like 80 to 90,000 words, divided it by 365, and wrote that many words a day, right? So
It's because her publisher made her write.
oh, well, that might be it too. But what I will take away from it is that that I can do you know what I mean? That I can do that. I have the kind of strength, and Kate has taught me that I can like plow my way to the end of a project. I'm a terrible abandoner of projects. So that's what I'm gonna take away. What will you do?
I think the first thing that sprang to my mind when you asked that question, I'm just gonna go with, which is I can be kind of cripplingly self-critical about my own writing. So I will march along through it, but I can get like where I'm editing the same thing over and over again. And Liz, and I think journalists generally, they just they have to get it out, right? Like they write fast, they have to get it on the paper, people are gonna edit it, but they're like very good at barfing the draft out.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And I think I've learned I'm writing faster. Not that that's in evidence right now, but but I'm writing faster, and I'm not as, I feel freer with it. I feel like I can take more risks with it. I don't feel like I have to be, I don't feel as judgmental about it somehow. Which is weird, because at the same time I'm like, I want to show good work to Liz. Like there's also
And you do, right?
the countervailing pieces. Yeah, like there's someone you want to impress, right? Like it's Liz Renzetti, for God's sake. I want to show her something. I can't do something bad to Liz Renzetti. But it's just there is a little more lift in it for me. Yeah.
Those are good questions.
Really good questions today. Thank you, everyone.
She's holding Margaret Atwood's burning questions. So you should let her ask her questions.
Firstly, I just say, sorry, I don't know about this event and I have something to do. And this is the reason why I do have patience with many people. So now just allow me to say before I go, okay? Firstly, I just say, wonderful work. Because from your presentation, I see like you develop a book, especially about mystery fiction, like your book, like a teamwork. You still have your voice, but under the lip, okay? And then now I see you look like a cute cat. Wonderful. You are in the right.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
The book is wonderful.
Thank
Because
you.
you look a cute cat. And then beside, like you say, the cat like a female lady. So from the family, you just like the center of the family, the mother, and the husband, the children, and cattle over the life. But in the public, like this book, you are in the center, and you let the people swim in your mystery, right? About the cat.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank
Thank you.
you very much.
Thank you, everyone, for being here.
Thank you all very
Thank you all.
So we,
And I hope, yep.
So congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's so kind.
Cute.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sincerely, okay? But now, I just have one idea for the pink lady. Hey, pink lady.
Oh, you're welcome.
Yeah.
Very welcome.
Okay. Okay, I just have the idea, you have to look for a man to develop a dog book.
Okay.
Okay?
Okay.
This is a cat book. I need a
Thank you. I
dog
appreciate you asking that. Thank you.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming. Yeah.
thank you very much.
Okay.
book. Okay.
So we will be moving on to the signing portion of the evening right now. So we'll ask you all, you look like a trustworthy bunch, so you can follow us along in a bit of a procession
go.
over to the signing table. And then you can get copies of the book signed. We have copies of the entire Hilton Renzetti oeuvre available there. So if there are any other books that you would like, please do avail yourself of those. If you do feel free to get a copy of the book signed before you pay for it, just please do remember to pay for the book before you physically leave the store. Now, I would like you all to join me one more time in acknowledging our wonderful guests for this evening. Of course, our host, Temur Durrani, Kate Hilton, and Elizabeth Renzetti. Have a wonderful night, everyone. Please do take care.